On my wedding day, my husband's sister walked into the bridal suite and threw a contract on my makeup table. She demanded 15% of my company's profits and the entire second floor of my new house for free. I asked two simple questions, and the illusion of a perfect family shattered. I calmly canceled the wedding, took back my house, and walked away with everything. 38 missed calls later, they finally realized who they were messing with. My name is Natalie. I am 34 years old and the CEO of a crisis management firm in Chicago. For years, I have made a living putting out fires for multi-million-dollar corporations. I never thought my biggest crisis would happen 30 minutes before walking down the aisle. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your boundaries tested by toxic in-laws and had to stand up for yourself. The bridal suite at the church was perfectly quiet, with only the gentle ticking of an old clock on the wall. In exactly 30 minutes, I was supposed to marry Jason. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, carefully adjusting the delicate lace sleeves of my custom $15,000 gown. I felt beautiful and ready for a new chapter of my life. But looking back now, I realize I was completely blind to the harsh reality of the family I was about to marry into. Jason is 34, a mid-level sales director who always seemed charming, attentive, and incredibly supportive of my career ambitions. His family, however, was a different story entirely. His half-sister Naomi is 29 and the absolute definition of an entitled golden child. As a Black American woman raised in a household where her mother catered to her every whim, Naomi firmly believed the world owed her everything. She called herself a social media content creator, but her real full-time job was spending money she did not earn and demanding attention from everyone around her. I always tried to keep the peace and ignored her passive-aggressive comments simply because I loved Jason. That was my first and biggest mistake. The heavy oak door of the bridal suite suddenly flew open. I did not even have time to turn around before Naomi marched into the room with a furious energy. She was wearing a bridesmaid dress that she had intentionally altered to look suspiciously like a second wedding gown just to steal the spotlight. Her face was set in a cold, arrogant glare. Without a single word of congratulations or a smile, she walked straight over to my vanity and slammed a thick stack of papers right next to my pristine white bouquet. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room, making me jump. I slowly turned around, keeping my hands on the delicate fabric of my dress. I looked at her and calmly asked what this was about. Naomi crossed her arms, her long acrylic nails tapping against her elbow in a rapid rhythm. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust, like I was something beneath her. "Read it and sign it right now," she demanded, her voice dripping with intense condescension. "This family has strict standards. We are not going to let you bring your arrogant CEO attitude into our lives and ruin our dynamic. You need to know your place before you walk out there and say your vows to my brother." I stared directly into her eyes, trying to process the sheer audacity of her timing. A normal bride might have broken down in tears right then and there, or yelled for church security to remove her. But my brain is specifically trained to manage and neutralize the worst disasters. When panic tries to set in, my emotions automatically shut off, and pure cold logic takes over. I stepped toward the table and picked up the heavy stack of papers. The cover page was printed in large, bold black letters. The title clearly read, "Family Duty Contract." I flipped to the first page, my eyes scanning the dense, legalistic paragraphs. My heart started pounding, not from sadness or betrayal, but from a freezing anger rising in my veins. This document outlined a series of insane rules I would be forced to follow as Jason's wife. It stated that I had to personally cook Sunday dinner for the entire extended family every single week, without any exceptions, regardless of my demanding business schedule. But that was just the beginning of the absurdity. There was a detailed financial section demanding my public relations firm divert 15% of all future profits to perpetually fund Naomi's new cosmetic startup. a startup with absolutely no solid business plan and zero actual products. And then I reached the real estate clause. Just last month, I closed on a gorgeous $2.4 million house in an upscale suburb using only my personal savings. The contract explicitly stated that the moment I officially married Jason, Naomi would immediately move into the entire second floor of that new house rent-free. She claimed she needed a large luxury space to film her social media content, and as family, it was my duty to provide it. I looked up from the ridiculous paperwork. Naomi was smirking, leaning against the doorframe like she had already won the lottery. She truly believed I would quietly sign away my company and my expensive home just to avoid a humiliating scene on my big day. She thought the immense pressure of 300 guests waiting outside would force me to cave in. She thought she could easily control me. That arrogant assumption woke up a very ruthless part of my personality. I was no longer a nervous bride waiting for a happy ending. I was the woman who built an empire from scratch, and no parasite was ever going to take what belonged to me. I read the words again just to make sure my mind was not playing tricks on me. Section 1 of the document demanded that I surrender 15% of my public relations firm's gross revenue to fund Naomi's beauty brand. Not net profit, but gross revenue. It was an act of complete financial suicide. For the past 10 years, I had sacrificed weekends relationships and my own health to build my company into a highly profitable enterprise. Now this girl who woke up at noon every day wanted to skim off the top just because she shared DNA with my fiancé. Section 2 outlined my mandatory domestic duties. It explicitly stated that I would be responsible for hosting cooking and paying for a lavish Sunday dinner for their entire extended family every single week. If I had to travel for a business crisis, I was required to cater the meal at my own expense. But Section 3 was the most delusional part of the entire stack of papers. It stated that upon signing my marriage certificate, Naomi would be granted exclusive and rent-free access to the entire second floor of the $2.4 million property I had just purchased. My home. The sanctuary I bought with a decade of my own sweat and sleepless nights. The contract even specified that I was not allowed to decorate that floor or enter it without her explicit written permission. It was effectively a deed transfer, disguised as a family favor. I looked up from the pages. Naomi was still standing there with that insufferable smirk on her face, tapping her acrylic nails against the doorframe. "You cannot be serious," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "You want me to hand over a percentage of my business and give you half of my house." Before Naomi could answer, the door creaked open again, and Brenda walked in. Brenda is Jason's mother and the absolute mastermind behind Naomi's profound entitlement. She was wearing a heavily beaded mother-of-the-groom dress that looked entirely too much like a bridal gown, complete with a sweeping train. She took one look at the contract in my hand and sighed heavily as if I was a difficult child throwing a tantrum. "Now, Natalie, do not make that sour face," Brenda said, walking over and placing a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. "We are all family now, and family takes care of each other. Naomi is expecting a baby soon, and she needs a large safe space to raise my grandchild. That house of yours is simply too big for just you and Jason. It is entirely selfish of you to hoard all of those beautiful empty rooms while your sister-in-law struggles to find a proper place to live." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. "Struggles?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "Naomi has never held a job for more than 3 months. She spends her days making lip-sync videos on the internet, and my company is not a charity fund for your family." Brenda waved her hand dismissively, as if my life's work was nothing more than a cute little hobby. "Oh, please, Natalie," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You make more than enough money for one person. Giving Naomi a tiny 15% is just pocket change to someone in your tax bracket. Think of it as an investment in your new family. Jason told us how much you value family and tradition. If you truly love my son, you will sign that paper right now and welcome us with open arms. It is the Christian thing to do." The audacity of her words hung in the air. They had it all planned out with military precision. They saw my success not as something to respect, but as a resource to be plundered. They viewed my bank account as their personal trust fund and my home as their free luxury apartment. The sheer manipulation was staggering. Brenda was actively weaponizing my love for her son to guilt-trip me into signing away my hard-earned assets. They knew I had 300 guests sitting outside. They knew important clients and media contacts were in those pews. They chose this exact moment 30 minutes before the ceremony because they assumed I would be too emotional and too afraid of a public scandal to fight back. They thought the threat of ruining the perfect wedding would force my hand and make me submit. I stood up slowly, clutching the papers so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, analyzing every angle of this ambush. I was preparing to tell Brenda exactly where she could shove her ridiculous contract. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, the door swung open for the third time. Jason walked in. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, and a white rose pinned to his lapel. My heart did a painful flip in my chest. This was the man I loved deeply. The man who held me when I was stressed from work. The man who promised to be my equal partner in everything. I looked at Jason expecting to see immediate shock or anger on his face. I expected him to look at his mother and sister and demand to know what they were doing harassing his bride moments before the wedding. I waited for him to snatch the absurd contract out of my hands and tear it to pieces. I waited for the man I was about to marry to step up and protect me. Jason walked toward me with a calm, confident smile on his face. He gently reached out and touched the delicate lace of my dress. "You look absolutely stunning, Natalie," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. For a split second I felt a wave of relief wash over my tense body. I truly thought he was going to turn around, kick his mother and sister out of the room and apologize profusely for their insane behavior. I waited for him to protect me. Instead, he looked down at the thick contract in my hand and then back up at my face. His expression did not change. He did not look angry, disgusted, or even surprised. He just looked expectant. "Just sign the papers, sweetheart," Jason murmured, brushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "It is just a small compromise to keep the peace in the family. You know how my mother worries about Naomi? Signing this will make everyone happy, and then we can go out there and have the perfect wedding we have always dreamed of." The relief I felt a second ago instantly evaporated, turning into a heavy block of ice in the pit of my stomach. I took a deliberate step back, pulling myself entirely out of his reach. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. He was not surprised by the contract, because he already knew about it. The man I was about to marry, the man I trusted with my heart and my future, was not my protector. He was the architect of this ambush. For the entire duration of our relationship, Jason had always loudly praised my ambition to his friends. He told everyone how proud he was to date a self-made CEO who built a public relations empire. But looking into his eyes right now, I finally saw the ugly truth he had been hiding behind his charming smile. Jason was deeply, fundamentally insecure about my success. He was a mid-level manager who secretly hated that his future wife earned 5 times his salary and owned a company he could never dream of building himself. He could not control me financially or professionally, so he decided to use his toxic family as a weapon to tear down my independence. He wanted to force me into submission under the disguise of traditional family duty so he could finally feel like the powerful man of the house. I took a deep breath, forcing my racing heart to slow down. I kept my posture straight and my voice perfectly steady. I looked him dead in the eye and asked my first question. "Did you read this document, Jason?" He actually had the nerve to look slightly annoyed by my hesitation. "Of course I read it, Natalie," he replied, shifting his weight and crossing his arms defensively. "Actually, my mother, Naomi, and I drafted it together last night over dinner. We just wanted to make sure our family expectations were clearly laid out before we make things official today. It is really not a big deal at all. You make plenty of money, and sharing the house is simply the right thing to do for my sister. You are marrying into my family now, and you have to do your part. drafted it together. The words echoed loudly in my mind. While I was busy finalizing the catering, dealing with the florist, and writing my deeply emotional vows, they were sitting around a dinner table drinking wine and plotting how to legally extract my wealth. They were literally dividing up my hard-earned assets like spoils of war. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over my entire being. The deep love I had for this man died right then and there in that stuffy, overpriced bridal suite. I nodded slowly, projecting an aura of someone who was carefully considering his words. I looked down at the contract again, pretending to study the ink, and then looked back at Jason. Naomi and Brenda were watching me closely, with triumphant, arrogant smiles, completely convinced that Jason's presence had successfully broken my resolve. They thought I was finally yielding. "All right," I said softly, my tone dangerously calm. "I just have one more question for you." I held up the pages, pointing directly to the specific real estate clause they had so carefully typed out. "How exactly do you plan to grant Naomi exclusive rights to the entire second floor of that house when your name is nowhere on the deed?" The room suddenly went dead silent. The confident, arrogant smile on Jason's face instantly faltered. Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her extravagant dress, and Naomi completely stopped tapping her acrylic nails. I took a slow, deliberate step closer to Jason, watching the healthy color rapidly drain from his cheeks. "I bought that luxury property with my own money." I continued, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a freshly sharpened blade. "I went to the closing alone. My name is the only one on the title, so I am very curious, Jason. What legal authority do you think you have to give away a house that does not even belong to you?" Jason stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as my question hung heavy in the stifling air of the bridal suite. The charming, confident facade he had worn since he walked into the room began to crack. He tugged nervously at the collar of his tailored tuxedo, suddenly looking very much like a little boy who had been caught stealing candy. He glanced over at his mother, and then at his sister. Brenda narrowed her eyes at him, silently demanding that he put me in my place. Naomi let out a loud, exasperated sigh, crossing her arms tighter. The pressure in the room was suffocating, and I could see Jason's fragile ego fracturing under the weight of their expectations. He desperately needed to prove to them that he was the man of the house, the one who held the ultimate authority over his wealthy future wife. His face flushed a deep, angry red, and the nervous hesitation vanished, replaced by a sudden, explosive defensiveness. "You always have to make everything so difficult, Natalie," he snapped, his voice echoing sharply against the mirrored walls. "You think you are so incredibly smart with your business degree and your corporate jargon. You think you can just dictate terms to my family because your name is on a piece of paper. Well, you are not the only one who knows how to handle legalities. I already took care of it." I did not blink. "Took care of what exactly?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet whisper. Jason took a step forward, puffing out his chest as if his next words were a triumphant victory speech rather than a confession to a federal crime. "I already fixed the house situation," he declared loudly. "I knew you would try to pull this selfish, independent woman routine, so I took matters into my own hands. Last week, I submitted a backdated marriage certificate to the bank along with some other paperwork. We are getting married today anyway, so it does not even matter. I used the equity in your house to secure a $300,000 loan under your name for Naomi's company. The funds are already being processed into her business account. As your husband, it is my responsibility to make sure the wealth in this family is distributed fairly." The room fell into a deathly silence. Even Brenda looked momentarily stunned by his sheer audacity, though a greedy smile quickly returned to her face. Naomi actually let out a short, high-pitched laugh of victory. They thought he was a genius. They thought he had brilliantly outsmarted the arrogant female CEO. I stood perfectly still, processing the magnitude of what he had just confessed. My brain, which had spent the last decade managing catastrophic corporate crises, immediately began categorizing the information. He did not just cross a marital boundary, he had forged a legal document. He had impersonated a spouse before the wedding. He had leveraged my personal credit and put a massive financial lien against a property I owned outright. He had committed textbook mortgage fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. These were not minor family disagreements. These were severe felonies, punishable by years in a federal prison. And he was standing there in his expensive tuxedo, proudly bragging about it, like he had just won a game of chess. He had deeply underestimated me. He assumed that because I was a woman in love, I would just cry, accept the financial abuse, and walk down the aisle to save face. He thought my fear of a ruined wedding would outweigh my sense of self-preservation. He forgot that I built a multi-million-dollar public relations firm by ruthlessly neutralizing threats to my clients. And right now, Jason and his family were the biggest threats to my life. I did not shed a single tear. My chest did not heave with sobs, and my hands did not shake. A profound, icy calm washed over my entire body. I looked at Jason not as the man I loved, but as a massive liability that I needed to aggressively eliminate from my life. Jason smiled, thinking my silence meant submission. "See," he said, his voice softening as he tried to play the charming groom again. "It is already done, Natalie. The money is secured, the house is shared, and everything is settled. Now please stop making a scene, grab your bouquet, and let us go get married. My family is waiting." I reached up to the top of my head. Slowly and deliberately, I pulled the intricate crystal pins out of my hair. I grabbed the edge of my expensive custom-made lace veil, the one Jason had said made me look like an angel. I ripped it out of my hair, ruining the elegant bridal updo I had spent 2 hours sitting in a salon chair to achieve. I let the veil drop to the floor. It pooled around my expensive satin heels like a discarded rag. I looked Jason dead in the eyes, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Get out. The wedding is off." The moment the words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room completely shattered. The arrogant smirk vanished from Naomi's face, instantly replaced by wide-eyed shock. Brenda gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she was about to have a heart attack right there on the pristine carpet. Jason lunged forward, trying to grab my arm, but I swiftly stepped back out of his reach, keeping my distance from the man who had just confessed to a felony. "Are you insane?" Jason hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "You cannot cancel the wedding right now. We have 300 guests sitting out there. My regional director is out there. Your major corporate clients are out there. If you walk out that door and call this off, you will humiliate both of us and destroy our professional reputations." "I am not the one who committed mortgage fraud," I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth or affection. "You humiliated yourself the moment you forged my signature. Now get out of my way before I call the police and have you arrested in that expensive tuxedo." "You listen to me, you selfish little brat," Brenda suddenly shouted, dropping her sophisticated mother of the groom act entirely. Her face was flushed with rage, and she pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You are not going to ruin my son's big day over a simple family misunderstanding. You are going to pick up that veil, put it back on your head, and march down that aisle like a good wife. If you cause a scene, I swear I will make sure everyone in this city knows how crazy and unstable you are." Naomi stepped up right next to her mother, nodding vigorously. "Yeah, you cannot do this to us. My friends are out there waiting to see me in my designer dress. You are going to look like a complete joke to your rich friends if you call off a wedding 30 minutes before it starts." They were trying to use the exact same pressure tactics that worked on 99% of normal people. The threat of public embarrassment. The paralyzing fear of ruining a massive, expensive event that had been planned for months. They genuinely believed that if they yelled loud enough and threatened my social reputation, I would eventually back down and submit to their demands. But they completely forgot what I do for a living. As the CEO of a crisis management firm, I deal with multi-million-dollar public relations disasters on a daily basis. I have sat in tense boardrooms with corporate executives who were sweating through their custom suits because their companies were facing total financial ruin. I know exactly how to handle hostile takeovers, vicious blackmail, and massive public scandals. My brain does not freeze in a crisis. It shifts gears into a cold, calculated combat mode. To me, This was no longer a wedding ceremony. This was a hostile negotiation, and Jason was a rogue asset that needed to be liquidated immediately. "You think you can intimidate me with the threat of a public scene?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that made Jason physically flinch. "Brenda, I manage public scenes for a living. I thrive in them. I control the narrative." Without another word, I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the door. The heavy silk of my ruined wedding dress rustled against the floor. Jason yelled my name, pleading with me to stop, but I ignored him entirely. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped out into the long corridor that led directly to the main hall. The church was magnificent, with soaring vaulted ceilings and massive stained glass windows casting colorful light across the wooden pews. I could hear the low murmur of 300 guests chatting excitedly. The string quartet was playing a soft, romantic prelude. The florist had done an incredible job filling the entire space with thousands of white roses and lush greenery. It was the perfect setting for a fairy tale wedding. I walked straight past the horrified wedding planner who was frantically waving a clipboard at me. I ignored her panicked questions and headed directly toward the small sound booth set up near the back of the hall. The audio technician looked up in sheer surprise as I approached his station. Before he could even say a word, I reached right over his complicated soundboard and grabbed the wireless microphone resting on the table. I gripped the cold metal of the microphone in my hand, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that always hit me right before a major press conference. My heart was completely steady. I turned around and faced the massive crowd. I took a deep breath and stepped out from the shadows of the corridor into the bright light of the main aisle. The moment I became visible, a sudden hush fell over the back rows and quickly spread like a wave through the entire church. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing, leaving a heavy silence. 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at me standing there, without my veil holding a microphone instead of a bridal bouquet. The silence in the massive room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. They were all holding their breath, waiting for the beautiful bride to speak. I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp thud echoed loudly through the high vaulted ceilings of the church. "I am so sorry for the inconvenience." "Everyone," I announced, my voice perfectly steady and ringing crystal clear through the large speakers. "But there is not going to be a wedding today." The crowd immediately erupted after my announcement. A wave of gasps and shocked murmurs spread through every corner of the church. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me, waiting for an explanation for this massive scandal. Jason sprinted out from the back hallway, his face pale with panic and intense anger. He frantically waved his arms, signaling the audio technician to cut my microphone, but I was already one step ahead of him. Last night, I had sent a special file to the visual technician claiming it was a surprise video tribute for the groom before our vows. I raised my free hand and gave a slight nod to the technician at the back of the room. Instantly, the massive LED screen behind the altar, which was supposed to show our romantic slideshow, lit up brightly. Instead of beautiful engagement photos, the entire hall saw a crystal-clear image of the family duty contract. I had taken photos of it with my phone right in the bridal suite and uploaded them directly to the church server. Every single line of black text was sharply displayed against the bright white background. People in the pews began to squint and read, and the confused murmurs quickly turned into loud gasps of outrage. I brought the microphone closer to my mouth and began reading each clause out loud with the cold, sharp voice of a CEO presenting to a board of directors. I read to the guests about how I was expected to hand over 15% of the revenue from my public relations firm to fund a non-existent cosmetic startup for the groom's sister. I emphasized every single word when I read the clause, demanding I surrender the entire second floor of the expensive luxury home I had just purchased with my own personal savings. And to conclude this horrifying presentation, I did not forget to announce the fact that Jason, their perfect golden groom, had secretly used a backdated marriage certificate to put a $300,000 lien against my house. The whispers in the church now exploded into a genuine wave of absolute disgust. 300 guests, including my most important business partners, major corporate investors, and even Jason's regional director were sitting there in pure disbelief. My wealthy friends and corporate colleagues looked at Jason's family with absolute contempt. These were ruthless business people, and they recognized immediately that this was not a normal family disagreement, but a blatant attempt at financial extortion and mortgage fraud. Jason stood completely frozen in the middle of the main aisle, his feet seemingly glued to the red carpet. His entire fake persona of a successful independent man was completely stripped away in front of hundreds of judging eyes. Right at that moment, the bridal suite doors flew open, and Naomi charged out like a rabid animal. She completely lost her carefully crafted persona of an elegant social media influencer. Her face was twisted with pure rage. Ignoring her expensive bridesmaid dress dragging on the floor, she stomped heavily up to the altar and lunged directly at me. Before I or anyone else could react, she swung her arm and violently snatched the microphone right out of my hand. A deafening screech echoed through the church speakers, making several guests wince and cover their ears. "What the hell do you think you are doing, you crazy witch?" Naomi screamed into the microphone, her high-pitched voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are just a stuck-up snob who thinks having some money means you can walk all over my family. You should feel incredibly lucky that my brother lowered his standards to marry a boring, ugly workaholic like you. You owe my family that house, and you owe me that money because I deserve a better lifestyle than you." Her words bounced off the walls and fell into a dead, suffocated silence. 300 people dressed in their absolute best formal wear were witnessing the most shameful public meltdown they had ever seen. Naomi's fake, elegant mask had completely shattered, revealing the rude, greedy, and uneducated nature of a parasite. Instead of offering sympathy, the guests started pulling out their smartphones. Dozens of camera lenses pointed straight at the altar, recording every single word of her unhinged rant. The social media career she was so incredibly proud of was currently being permanently destroyed by her own actions on the cameras of dozens of wealthy strangers. Seeing that the situation was completely out of control and impossible to salvage with words, Jason's mother Brenda decided to deploy her ultimate manipulation tactic. She stumbled out from the back, clutching her chest tightly, and began taking loud, dramatic gasps of air. "Oh, my heart, I cannot breathe," she moaned theatrically. She staggered a few steps, squeezed her eyes shut, and dramatically collapsed right in the middle of the red carpet. It was a classic fake fainting spell designed to distract the crowd, play the victim, and frame me as the cruel bride who sent her mother-in-law into cardiac arrest. But what she never expected was the completely cold reaction from the massive crowd. In a soap opera, people would scream and rush over to help. But here, in a room filled with sharp, intelligent people who had just witnessed a blatant extortion plot, not a single person moved an inch. No one ran to help her up. No one yelled to call an ambulance. They simply stood perfectly still, held their phones steady, and coldly recorded the pathetic performance of a greedy woman. I stood on the altar calmly looking down at the perfect family I had almost surrendered my life and assets to. Jason remained frozen in absolute humiliation, unable to even look in the direction of his boss. Naomi was throwing a toddler tantrum on the stage, and Brenda was lying flat on the cold floor, occasionally peeking out of one eye to see if anyone was coming to save her. I smoothed out the lace on my dress, smiled softly, and prepared to deliver the final blow. Jason had just threatened that his belongings were already inside my house, and he had the right to stay. But he had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead of him. Jason finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The overwhelming humiliation shifted into blind, destructive rage. He stepped right over his mother, who was still pretending to be unconscious on the red carpet. He marched up the altar steps, his expensive leather shoes stomping heavily against the polished wood. Before I could turn away, he lunged forward and grabbed my upper arm. His grip was painfully tight, digging into my skin through the delicate lace of my dress. His face was inches from mine, his eyes bloodshot and filled with pure malice. He was breathing heavily, completely abandoning his charming gentleman persona. The guests in the front rows gasped loudly, seeing his sudden physical aggression. A few of my male colleagues even stood up from their pews, ready to intervene if he tried to hurt me, but I raised my free hand slightly to signal them to hold back. I needed to hear exactly what this criminal had to say. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Natalie?" he hissed through gritted teeth. His voice was low enough that the recording guests could not hear the exact words, but his aggressive posture was obvious to everyone. "You think you just won the war because you showed a few pieces of paper on a screen and made my family look bad in front of your rich friends. You think you can just walk away from me, cancel the wedding, and keep everything you own? Well, you are completely wrong. You might have ruined this expensive ceremony, but I am still taking exactly what I want from you. While you were sitting in the salon chair getting your hair and makeup done at 5 o'clock this morning, I was incredibly busy," he continued, a twisted, arrogant smile forming on his lips. "I hired a private moving company, paying them double to work before dawn. They packed up my entire apartment and every single thing from Naomi's place. Every piece of furniture, every box of clothes, and all of Naomi's heavy studio equipment is already inside your massive $2.4 million house. We completely moved in before the sun even came up today. I have my keys and my belongings are physically inside the property." My mind immediately recognized the exact legal nightmare he was trying to create. It was a classic predatory move based on a major flaw in the American residential legal system. He was trying to establish squatters' rights to steal my property. In many states, once a person moves their belongings into a home and claims it as their primary residence, the actual homeowner cannot simply kick them out or change the locks. The police are forced to treat it as a civil matter between a landlord and a tenant, even if there is no lease. Squatters know how to exploit these loopholes perfectly. He knew that the formal eviction process could easily take 6 to 8 months of brutal court battles, massive legal fees, and endless stress. During that time, squatters usually destroy the property out of spite. I established legal residency. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his breath hot and disgusting against my cheek. "I even forwarded my mail to your address last week and registered my car to that location. I am a legal occupant of that property right now. If you try to call the cops to throw me out, they will just look at my mail and tell you it is a civil dispute. You cannot legally touch me or my sister. We are going to live in that luxury mansion, and you are going to pay the massive mortgage every single month while your lawyers desperately try to serve me eviction papers. You tried to publicly humiliate me, but I am the one who is going to bleed your bank account completely dry." He squeezed my arm tighter, expecting me to panic or break down in tears at the horrifying thought of strangers taking over my personal sanctuary. He desperately wanted to see fear and defeat in my eyes. Instead, I slowly looked down at his hand, gripping my arm, and then looked directly back into his angry eyes. The icy calm inside me solidified into something much more dangerous and calculated. I did not pull away or flinch. I simply stood my ground with the unwavering confidence of a woman who always plans for the worst-case scenario in every contract. "Take your hand off me, Jason," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet and steady pitch. The absolute lack of fear or emotion in my tone made him hesitate. He slowly loosened his grip and took a half step back, uncertainty flickering across his face for the very first time since he walked up to the altar. I smoothed out the wrinkled fabric of my sleeve and offered him a slow, chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. "You are incredibly confident for a man who clearly does not understand how private security firms operate," I said softly. "You really think you can just walk right into my house and claim it as your own? I strongly suggest you gather your mother and your sister, drive back to that neighborhood right now, and see exactly what is waiting for you on the front lawn." Jason backed away, his face twisted with anger and confusion at my terrifying calmness. He did not say another word. He turned around and marched quickly down the red-carpeted aisle. Naomi and Brenda scrambled to their feet and hurried after him, ignoring the loud whispers and disgusted looks from hundreds of important guests sitting in the church. Their only goal right now was to rush back to my $2.4 million mansion to barricade themselves inside and make their property theft a reality. They firmly believed that if they just locked the doors and claimed they moved in early this morning, the law would automatically take their side and I would be helpless to stop them. Jason's expensive sports car sped down the highway, heading straight for the upscale suburbs. He slammed on the gas pedal and ran red lights with the absolute arrogance of a man who thought he had already won the game. Naomi sat in the passenger seat constantly muttering insults about me, while Brenda sat in the back clutching her chest and breathing heavily, but her eyes were gleaming with greed at the thought of living in a luxury estate. However, the scene waiting for them when the car finally turned onto the quiet tree-lined street leading to my house was absolutely nothing like what they had imagined. Jason slammed on the brakes so hard the tires let out a piercing screech against the asphalt. Right in front of the gate to my gorgeous property, sitting directly on the clean paved sidewalk, was a massive pile of garbage. Dozens of cardboard boxes and large heavy-duty black trash bags were thrown haphazardly onto the curb. Naomi gasped loudly and threw her door open, rushing out of the car before Jason even turned off the engine. She ran toward the messy pile and started screaming at the top of her lungs. Her expensive designer handbags, her limited edition makeup palettes, and her entire professional lighting system for her social media videos were all shoved mercilessly into crushed trash cans. Right next to her ruined belongings was Jason's entire wardrobe. His custom-tailored suits, his premium leather shoes, and all his personal items were scattered across the grass near the street. Early this morning, he had secretly hired a moving company to bring all these things into my living room, to fake a legal residency. He thought I was too busy getting my hair and makeup done for the wedding to notice the intrusion. But he forgot one incredibly important fact about who I am. As a chief executive officer who handles corporate crises for a living, I never allow myself to be caught off guard, and I maintain the highest level of security for my personal assets. The moment my smart home security system detected unauthorized movement at 5 in the morning, I immediately called an elite private security firm that my company frequently partners with. I paid them a massive premium to go to my house physically, remove every single piece of trash that did not belong to me, and completely reprogram the biometric locks on every door while Jason was busy smiling at the church. These parasites actually thought they could outsmart me, but they were dead wrong. Jason turned bright red with absolute fury. He clenched his fists, growled a string of vulgar curses, and charged aggressively toward the closed iron gate. He planned to force his way onto the property and break a window to regain his dignity. But the second his hand touched the metal latch, the heavy wooden front door of the mansion suddenly opened. 4 incredibly large men wearing professional black suits stepped out onto the front porch in perfect unison. They were highly trained security contractors with serious combat experience. All 4 men stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the entrance, crossing their thick arms and looking down at Jason with the cold, dead eyes of professionals who were legally authorized to use physical force if necessary. Jason froze in his tracks instantly. His natural cowardice took over the moment he was forced to confront truly dangerous men. He took a few steps back, swallowing hard, but he still tried to maintain an aggressive posture in front of his mother and sister. He fumbled with his dress pants and quickly pulled out his expensive smartphone. His hands were shaking as he dialed a number, but his eyes remained glaring at the 4 massive guards blocking his path. "I am a legal resident of this property," he yelled, trying to make his voice sound deep and threatening. "You are all illegally trespassing on my home. I am calling the emergency line right now to have the police come and put you all in handcuffs and throw that crazy witch Natalie in a federal prison for touching my property. Just stand right there and wait to see what the law does to you." Just a few minutes after Jason made his frantic phone call, a police patrol car with flashing lights slowly turned onto the quiet street. The sound of the siren broke the peaceful atmosphere of the upscale neighborhood. 2 police officers stepped out of their vehicle and were immediately drawn to the massive pile of designer garbage scattered across the sidewalk, along with the presence of 4 intimidating security guards blocking the front door. Jason immediately rushed toward the officers, wearing the pathetic expression of an innocent victim who was being unjustly persecuted. He began to pour out a string of carefully prepared lies to manipulate the situation. "Officers, I am a legal resident at this house," he said with a fake trembling voice, mixed with a hint of desperation. "My fiancé went completely crazy, canceled our wedding today, and hired these thugs to throw all of my personal property out onto the street. I demand that you arrest them immediately and escort me back inside my own home where I belong." The older police officer held up his hand, asking Jason to calm down and step back. He pulled out his notepad and asked a question in the calm, professional tone typical of law enforcement. "You claim you live here, so do you have any documentation proving ownership or a signed lease agreement?" Jason immediately flashed a triumphant smile. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out an opened envelope and a printed piece of paper. "This is my phone bill and a utility statement for this month sent directly to my name at this exact address," he declared loudly. According to state law, anyone who receives mail and utility bills at a property is legally recognized as a tenant. Even without a formal lease, the landlord cannot just throw my belongings out on the curb or change the locks without a court order. This is an illegal eviction, and she is violating my legal right to residency. While Jason was busy rambling to the police officers, Naomi was not standing idle in the background. She took a few steps back and found the perfect angle to capture both the pile of ruined belongings and the security guards standing on the porch. She held up her smartphone with the live video feature turned on for her social media channel. "Everyone look at this right now." She spoke into the camera lens with a tone of deep tragedy and manufactured outrage. "This is exactly how a wealthy corporate executive treats her husband's family. She did not just cancel the wedding at the last minute, but she completely heartlessly threw all the belongings of a pregnant Black woman out onto the cold street. She is using her extreme financial privilege to bypass the law and discriminate against us. Please share this video everywhere to expose her true cruel nature to the world." Naomi was deliberately playing the race and pregnancy cards to incite an angry internet mob. She knew that a live video with a title about a rich executive evicting a pregnant Black family member would instantly attract millions of views and generate a massive wave of public backlash aimed directly at my public relations firm. She wanted to use the crushing pressure of public opinion to force me to surrender and let her walk right into my house. The older police officer glanced over at Naomi filming her dramatic performance, and then took the utility bill from Jason's hand. The officer frowned in deep thought because the laws protecting illegal squatters in this state were notoriously complicated and favored the occupants. Professional squatters frequently exploited this exact legal loophole to stay in houses for many months rent-free. If Jason truly had proof of receiving mail at this location, the police might actually be forced to ask my security guards to step aside to let him bring his trash back inside. The police would simply advise me to take the matter to civil court for a formal eviction. That was the exact perfect scenario Jason had calculated, and he was looking incredibly smug about his genius plan. But right at the moment, the police officer opened his mouth to ask the security team to cooperate. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade smoothly rolled up and parked directly behind the police cruiser. The heavy car door opened and I stepped out onto the pavement with complete composure. I was no longer wearing that heavy, complicated wedding dress. I had changed into a sharply tailored designer business suit that radiated the absolute authority of a corporate leader. I walked calmly across the sidewalk, completely ignoring Jason's hateful glare and the phone camera Naomi was shoving into my face. The 4 security guards immediately stood at attention the second they saw me approach. I walked right past the complaining groom and approached the older police officer. "Good afternoon, officer," I said in a clear, steady voice. "I am Natalie, the sole owner of this estate, and I am the one who made the emergency call. The man standing next to you is not a tenant, and he holds absolutely no legal residency rights here. He is merely an unwanted guest whose visitation privileges were permanently revoked by the legal property owner less than an hour ago." Jason let out a loud, sarcastic laugh, crossing his arms over his chest. You cannot trick the police with your corporate buzzwords, Natalie, he sneered. You bought this place and your name is on the deed, but I already moved my things inside and established residency through the postal service. The police know this is a civil dispute, and they cannot kick me out without a judge's order. He turned to the officer with a smug expression. Please tell her to open those doors so we can put our expensive belongings back inside where they belong. I just smiled softly and lifted the thick stack of legal documents. And right on the front cover of that folder was a bright red official government notary stamp, which was the ultimate legal weapon that would completely crush all of their delusional hopes. The older police officer took the heavy folder from my hands. He opened it carefully and immediately focused on the bright red government notary stamp on the first page. He took his time reading through the dense legal paragraphs. Jason stood a few feet away with a deeply arrogant smile still plastered across his face. He leaned casually against the police cruiser. He truly believed that his printed utility bill and his fake confidence would easily outsmart my legal documents. He was patiently waiting for the police officer to order my private security guards out of the way. Naomi was still standing in the background. She kept her smartphone pointed directly at my face. She was aggressively narrating her fake tragedy to her live social media audience. She painted herself as the innocent victim of a wealthy tyrant. Brenda was watching the scene with greedy anticipation. The police officer flipped to the second page of the documents. His facial expression completely changed. He looked up at Jason and then looked back down at the paperwork in his hands. He closed the thick folder and handed it back to me with a very respectful nod. He turned his body to face Jason directly. His voice was no longer patient or accommodating. Sir, this property is not a private residential home, he stated in a loud and clear voice. This real estate is officially registered as a corporate asset. It is wholly owned by an irrevocable trust. The woman standing right here is the authorized managing director of that corporate trust. The smug smile on Jason's face vanished in an instant. The color completely drained from his cheeks. He blinked several times, trying to process the complex legal reality that was crashing down on him. What are you talking about? He demanded. His voice cracked slightly, revealing his rising panic. We bought this house together to live in as a married couple. I receive my personal mail here every single day. You just saw the utility bill in my own hand. You cannot tell me I do not live here. Receiving your personal mail at a corporate facility does not legally establish residential tenancy, the police officer explained firmly. You cannot claim squatters' rights or typical tenant protections on a commercial trust property without a signed corporate lease agreement. According to these notarized legal documents, you are officially classified as a temporary, unauthorized guest. The managing director of this trust has officially revoked your guest privileges. You have absolutely no legal right to be anywhere near this property. Naomi immediately stopped talking to her live audience. She slowly lowered her smartphone. Her mouth was hanging open in pure, unadulterated shock. Brenda grabbed her chest again, but this time she was not faking her physical distress. They finally realized their brilliant master plan to steal my luxury home was completely destroyed. They were defeated by a watertight legal structure they did not even comprehend. Wealthy individuals do not simply put their personal names on expensive assets to be easily targeted by greedy scammers. We protect our wealth behind impenetrable layers of corporate entities and ironclad trusts. My property was legally untouchable. The older police officer pointed a stern warning finger directly at Jason's chest. I am giving you and your family exactly 15 minutes to gather your trash from the public sidewalk and leave this neighborhood, he ordered. His tone left absolutely no room for negotiation. If you step one single foot onto that grass, or if you are still standing on this street when my watch hits the 15-minute mark, I will personally put you in handcuffs. You will be arrested immediately. You will be charged with criminal trespassing and illegal dumping. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Jason looked frantically at the 4 massive security guards standing silently on my front porch. He looked at the police officer who was now resting his hand casually on his duty belt. He finally looked at me. His eyes were filled with absolute hatred and utter defeat. He knew he was completely beaten in every possible way. He aggressively shoved his useless utility bill back into his suit pocket. He turned to his mother and his sister. "Pick up the boxes right now," he snapped at them. His voice was dripping with venom and humiliation. They frantically scrambled to drag their expensive clothes and broken makeup palettes back toward his sports car. It was an incredibly pathetic and humiliating sight. The elegant groom and his demanding family were now reduced to picking up garbage from the street. But Naomi was not willing to leave without firing one last desperate shot. She slammed the heavy trunk of the car shut and marched back toward me. She stopped just short of the property line, afraid of being arrested. "You can keep your stupid house," she screamed. Her voice echoed loudly down the quiet street. "We do not even need it anyway. The $300,000 loan already cleared into my business account early this morning. You are the exact person who signed those mortgage papers. So you are the one stuck paying that massive debt back to the bank. Enjoy your ruined credit score." I did not argue with her or show any signs of anger. I just offered her a slow, chilling smile and waved goodbye. "Enjoy spending that money, Naomi," I replied softly. "Enjoy it for as long as you possibly can." Jason aggressively slammed the heavy trunk of his sports car shut. He muttered a string of bitter curses under his breath, completely humiliated in front of the police officers and my private security team. Brenda was already sitting in the back seat of the car, shivering with a mixture of profound embarrassment and sheer panic. They had completely lost their grand battle and were now being legally escorted off my property. The expensive engine of the sports car roared to life, ready to speed away from the scene of their massive defeat. But Naomi was not willing to accept her humiliating loss just yet. She refused to walk away feeling like the loser in a war she thought she had already won. Just as Jason reached for the gear shift to drive away, Naomi violently pushed the passenger door open. She stepped out of the car and stomped aggressively back toward the edge of my property line. She stopped right at the edge of the public sidewalk, her eyes wide with unhinged fury. She pointed her long acrylic fingernail directly at my face, her chest heaving with rage. "You think keeping this stupid house makes you the winner here, you arrogant witch?" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Her shrill voice echoed down the quiet street, causing a few wealthy neighbors to stop watering their lawns and stare at the commotion. "You think you can just use your expensive corporate lawyers and a bunch of legal loopholes to kick us to the curb and ruin our lives? You are completely wrong. This house is absolutely nothing compared to what we already took from you." I stood perfectly still on my front porch, crossing my arms over my chest and watching her spectacular meltdown with absolute calm. My 4 security guards immediately stepped forward, preparing to physically intervene, but I raised my hand slightly to stop them. I wanted to hear exactly what desperate delusion this parasite was still clinging to. The 2 police officers standing nearby also turned their attention back to Naomi, resting their hands near their utility belts in case she tried to initiate a physical assault. The $300,000 loan was already fully disbursed by the bank early this morning. Naomi continued screaming, her face twisting into a mask of pure manic triumph. "That massive pile of cash is already sitting safely inside my official business checking account. And guess whose legal signature is printed on all of those binding mortgage documents? It is your signature, Natalie. You are the one who is legally responsible for that massive lien against this property. We got the cash and there is absolutely nothing you or these cops can do about it now. The police cannot force me to give that money back because the bank legally approved the transfer. So go ahead and keep this empty house. You can spend the rest of your miserable life working day and night just to pay off the massive bank debt we left you. Enjoy your completely ruined credit score and your lonely, miserable existence." She let out a loud, piercing laugh that sounded completely unhinged. The expensive makeup on her face was smeared from her sweat, and anger making her look incredibly pathetic, but her arrogant attitude remained entirely intact. Jason rolled down his window and actually offered a smug, nasty smile backing up his sister. They truly believed they had delivered the ultimate fatal blow. They genuinely thought that securing the $300,000 in cash guaranteed them a life of luxury, while I suffered the severe legal and financial consequences of their fraud. Naomi smugly assumed she had completely outsmarted a seasoned corporate executive. She believed that no lawyer or police officer could reverse a completed bank wire transfer. The older police officer frowned deeply and took a step forward, ready to warn her about disturbing the peace and public harassment. But I spoke up before he could intervene. I did not look angry, panicked, or devastated like Naomi desperately wanted me to be. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of satisfaction flowing through my veins. I slowly walked down the front steps of my porch, closing the distance between us. I stopped just a few feet away from her and offered her the brightest, most chilling smile I had displayed all day. The bright morning sun illuminated the absolute cold calculation in my eyes. "Enjoy spending every single penny of that money, Naomi," I said softly. My voice was incredibly calm and smooth, but it carried the sharp, lethal edge of a razor blade. "Go ahead and buy all the expensive designer clothes you want. Throw lavish parties and brag about your fake wealth to your followers on social media. Enjoy that fraudulent business account for as long as you possibly can, because your time is running out very quickly, and the price you are about to pay is going to cost you much more than just a house." I gave her a polite, elegant wave goodbye, as if I was dismissing a minor annoyance. My smile only grew wider and much more dangerous. Naomi suddenly stopped laughing. Her loud, arrogant cackle died in her throat. The smug confidence on her face began to physically crack. She stared at me with profound confusion and a brand new sense of deep, primal fear creeping into her mind. She could not understand why I was so terrifyingly calm about a massive financial debt. She had absolutely no idea that by accepting that wired money into her account, the federal crime of wire fraud was officially complete. The sports car door opened, and Jason yelled at her to get inside, his voice trembling with new panic. The car tires screeched against the pavement as they sped away, leaving a trail of exhaust smoke. But I knew their real nightmare was only just beginning. The sun finally set over the upscale Chicago suburb, casting long, dark shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. My massive $2.4 million mansion was completely silent. It was a deep, peaceful quiet that stood in sharp contrast to the absolute chaos and screaming that had consumed my entire morning. I walked slowly through the empty, luxurious rooms of my home, running my hand along the expensive custom furniture. I was no longer wearing that heavy, stifling wedding gown or the sharp business suit. I had changed into a comfortable silk robe. I walked into my massive gourmet kitchen and opened a bottle of incredibly expensive red wine that I had originally bought to celebrate my upcoming honeymoon. I poured the dark crimson liquid into a crystal glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The rich flavor tasted absolutely incredible. It tasted exactly like freedom. I walked into the spacious living room and sat down on my plush velvet sofa. I placed my smartphone face up on the smooth surface of the marble coffee table. For a long time, the house was completely still. I sat there enjoying the profound sense of absolute control. I had successfully protected my empire, my finances, and my sanity from a family of greedy parasites. I did not feel heartbroken or lonely. I only felt a massive, overwhelming sense of relief. I had dodged a massive bullet just 30 minutes before it could permanently destroy my life. But I knew the silence in the room was not going to last very long. I knew Jason and his family were currently sitting in their cramped apartment, slowly realizing the magnitude of their failure. And exactly on cue, the bright screen of my smartphone suddenly lit up, piercing the dim lighting of the living room. The caller identification flashed Jason's name in large, bold letters. The phone vibrated violently against the hard marble surface, creating a loud, buzzing noise. I did not reach for it. I did not even lean forward. I just sat back against the soft cushions, swirling the red wine in my crystal glass, and watched the screen light up the dark room. I watched his name flash over and over again, until the call finally went to voicemail. It was an incredibly empowering feeling. For the entire duration of our relationship, Jason had always demanded my immediate attention. If he called, I was expected to answer regardless of what corporate crisis I was managing. But now he had absolutely no power over me. He was completely locked out of my home and locked out of my life. Less than 2 seconds after the first call ended, the phone screen lit up again. Call number 2. I took another slow sip of my wine, letting the vibration echo through the quiet house. Then came call number 3. Then call number 4. The sheer desperation radiating from the glowing device was almost palpable. They were realizing that their aggressive intimidation tactics had completely failed, and now they were desperately trying to re-establish contact to regain some level of control. By the time I finished my first glass of wine, the missed call counter on my screen had reached 10. They were absolutely relentless, but their persistence only proved how incredibly pathetic they truly were. They were like angry children throwing a tantrum because they were finally told no. Then the phone stopped vibrating and started chiming rapidly with incoming text messages. I leaned forward slightly to read the notification previews popping up on my lock screen. The messages were not from Jason. They were from his mother, Brenda. Her texts were long blocks of angry, frantic words sent one after another in rapid succession. She was aggressively threatening to drag me into civil court. She demanded that I reimburse them for the emotional distress I caused by canceling the lavish wedding at the last minute. She claimed she was going to hire the most ruthless lawyers in the entire city to sue me for breach of promise and force me to hand over the keys to the mansion. She typed that I was a cruel, heartless monster who was going to pay dearly for disrespecting her perfect family. I read her furious, empty threats and simply smiled. I reached out and poured myself another glass of red wine. Brenda was typing out angry lawsuits, completely unaware that her daughter had just committed a massive federal crime. They thought they were going to sue me in civil court, but they had absolutely no idea what was actually coming for them. I watched the screen of my smartphone light up again and again. The missed call counter slowly climbed past 15. Brenda finally stopped sending her furious text messages about civil lawsuits. The aggressive energy from their side was beginning to burn out. Then the 20th call came through. This time, Jason did not just let it ring. He left a voicemail. I tapped the screen to play the audio out loud in my quiet living room. I expected to hear more shouting and demanding threats. Instead, his tone had completely changed. The arrogant confidence was entirely gone. His voice sounded tight and incredibly strained. "Natalie, pick up the phone," he said, his breathing heavy and uneven. "I just tried to pay for a hotel room for my mother, and my card was completely declined." The front desk said the transaction was blocked for suspicious activity. "I tried to log into my mobile banking app, but my entire account is locked. It says I need to contact the fraud department immediately. Stop playing games and tell me what you did to my accounts. Call me back right now." I smiled and took another sip of my red wine. He still thought this was just a petty revenge tactic. He still believed I was just temporarily freezing his credit cards to punish him for the morning drama. He had absolutely no idea that the federal banking system moves with ruthless speed when wire fraud is detected. When you forge a signature on a mortgage document and wire $300,000 into a fake business account, the automated security algorithms flag it almost instantly. And I had personally provided the bank with the exact Internet Protocol address and device information he used to commit the crime days ago. I had my security team prepare the entire evidence file before I even put on my wedding dress. The 25th call came through exactly 10 minutes later. I played the next voicemail. The false bravado was completely stripped away. Jason sounded genuinely terrified. "Natalie, please answer the phone," he begged. His voice was shaking uncontrollably. "I just called the bank customer service line. They told me my personal accounts and Naomi's business accounts are completely frozen by a federal order. They refuse to give me any more information. They said I have to speak to federal financial investigators. What is going on, Natalie? Please just pick up the phone and talk to me. We can fix this together. I am sorry about the house. Just tell the bank it was a misunderstanding, please. He was finally realizing the catastrophic reality of his actions. The man who had proudly bragged about forging my signature just a few hours ago was now begging for my mercy. He thought he could just apologize and make a federal crime disappear. He thought I would swoop in and save him from the consequences of his own greed. I placed my empty wine glass on the coffee table and leaned back against the sofa. I listened to his desperate voicemails one after another. Call number 30. Call number 35. Each message was more pathetic than the last. He was crying in one of them, pleading with me to save his career and his freedom. The silence in my house felt even more powerful now. It was the silence of total victory. I had not lifted a single finger since I left the church. I had simply stepped out of the way and allowed his own criminal actions to destroy him. He dug his own grave, and now he was desperately screaming from the bottom of it. I watched the clock on the wall tick forward. I knew the federal authorities were already moving. Then the screen lit up for the 38th time. It was the final call. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I pressed play on the screen. The audio started playing loudly through the quiet living room. But this time Jason was not speaking right away. There was a chaotic background noise. I could hear Naomi screaming hysterically in the distance. I could hear heavy footsteps and loud male voices shouting orders. And cutting through all of that chaos was the unmistakable piercing sound of police sirens wailing loudly. The sirens were incredibly close. They were right outside their building. Natalie Jason finally sobbed into the phone. His voice was barely a whisper over the sound of the blaring sirens. There are police cars surrounding Naomi's apartment building. There are men in tactical gear walking up the stairs. They are banging on the front door. They are shouting about a federal warrant for wire fraud. Oh my God, Natalie, they are going to break the door down. You have to help me. Please tell them you authorized the loan. Please do not let them take me to prison. The voicemail abruptly cut off with the loud sound of wood splintering and a door being kicked open. The sound of the splintering door echoed from the speaker of my phone. The automated voice announced that the voicemail had ended. The living room returned to total silence. I stared at the dark screen of my device, processing the sheer magnitude of the destruction Jason had just brought upon himself. He was about to learn a very brutal lesson about how the real world operates. Jason and Naomi honestly thought they could outsmart the federal banking system of the United States. They actually believed that securing a $300,000 loan was as simple as forging a signature on a piece of paper and walking away with a mountain of cash. They were completely ignorant of how strictly modern financial institutions monitor massive wire transfers. The moment a brand new corporate account suddenly receives a massive influx of cash from a residential mortgage line, it triggers an immediate automatic review by federal financial regulators. The system is specifically designed by the government to catch money laundering and wire fraud before the funds can be hidden or spent. American banks do not just hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars without verifying the exact origin and destination of every single penny. The American financial system is built on complex layers of automated security protocols designed to detect anomalies. When Jason submitted a backdated marriage certificate, he committed forgery. When he used that forged document to secure a mortgage lien against a property he did not legally own, he committed severe real estate fraud. But his ultimate fatal mistake was directing a massive electronic wire transfer into a highly suspicious business account. That specific action immediately triggered federal jurisdiction. Federal regulators do not care about family drama or wedding day arguments. They only care about unauthorized fund transfers and financial crimes. The moment that stolen money hit Naomi's account, the trap officially snapped shut. The bank automatically froze all the assets and alerted the federal authorities. They thought they had won the lottery. They thought they had secured a luxurious lifestyle at my expense. But all they really did was provide the federal government with a perfectly documented paper trail of their own criminal activities. Wire fraud is an incredibly serious federal offense. By using electronic communications to facilitate their financial theft, They escalated their crime from a local domestic dispute into a major federal investigation. And they did it all using the laptop I bought for him and the wireless internet connection at my house, which meant every single digital footprint led straight back to them. I picked up the phone from the smooth marble coffee table. I unlocked the screen and opened my contact list. I pressed the button to call him back. It was the very first time I was initiating contact with him since I walked out of that church hours ago. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the ringing tone. I honestly expected a federal agent to answer the device to inform me that the owner was currently being placed in federal custody. It rang once, and then twice. Suddenly, the line clicked open. Jason answered the phone. He must have snatched the device in a state of absolute desperate panic while the agents were securing the room. Natalie, he sobbed hysterically into the receiver. His voice was completely broken and unrecognizable. It sounded like he was hyperventilating. Thank God you finally called me back. It is a complete nightmare over here. There are federal agents everywhere in the apartment. They have Naomi sitting on the couch in handcuffs right now. They are completely tearing her studio apart and seizing all of her computer equipment. He was crying so hard he could barely form a complete sentence. They told us the bank permanently froze the accounts and flagged the wire transfer as a fraudulent transaction, he choked out. They said we are being investigated for federal wire fraud and identity theft. You have to help me, Natalie. You are the only one who can stop this. Please tell them you approved the transfer. Tell them it was a joint financial decision for our marriage. If you just tell the agents you signed the papers, they will let us go. I listened to his pathetic begging without feeling a single ounce of pity. He was perfectly willing to ruin my financial future and trap me in a massive debt just to please his greedy family. Now that the federal government was involved, he suddenly remembered how much he needed me. He wanted me to lie to federal agents and risk my own freedom to save him from a prison sentence he entirely deserved. He still viewed me as a tool he could use to fix his own catastrophic mistakes. Are you listening to me, Natalie? Jason cried out, his voice cracking with pure terror. Please say something. The lead agent is walking over to me right now. He is asking to see my hands. Please just tell him it was a misunderstanding between a husband and a wife. I will do anything you want. I will pay you back every single penny. I will never speak to my mother or my sister ever again. Just do not let them take me to jail. I remained perfectly silent for another long moment. I wanted him to feel the crushing weight of his situation. I wanted him to realize that the brilliant master plan he bragged about at the altar was actually the trap that destroyed his life. He tried to steal my wealth and my home, but all he managed to do was guarantee himself a decade behind bars. I finally opened my mouth to speak to him. My voice was incredibly calm and steady. I am not going to lie to a federal agent, Jason, I said softly. My voice was perfectly steady and devoid of any sympathy. I am not going to risk my own freedom and my professional reputation to save a criminal. You asked me earlier how I planned to protect my assets. You thought I was just throwing a tantrum at the church. You thought my only defense was kicking your trash onto the sidewalk. But you completely forgot who purchased the expensive laptop you use every single day. You work in sales, but you are incredibly ignorant about corporate security protocols. My crisis management firm paid for that computer. That means it is technically company property, and every single device issued by my company is equipped with military-grade tracking software. That software monitors every keystroke, every downloaded file, and every single internet protocol address. I get an automated security alert whenever sensitive financial documents are accessed or modified. I knew exactly what you were doing 3 days ago. I received a notification the exact second you uploaded that backdated marriage certificate. I sat in my office and watched you forge my digital signature in real time. I watched you submit the fraudulent loan application to the bank. I saw every single piece of evidence forming a perfect digital trail. I even watched you forward the confirmation emails to your sister Naomi. You left a digital footprint so massive that even an amateur investigator could find it. Jason let out a loud, choked gasp on the other end of the line. The sound of heavy boots and shouting agents grew louder in the background. "But why did you not say anything?" he cried out. "Why did you let me do it? Why did you even show up at the church today if you already knew everything?" I took a slow breath and let the reality of my strategy sink into his mind. "If I had confronted you 3 days ago, you would have just denied it. You would have manipulated the situation and called me paranoid. If I canceled the loan application before it was processed, the bank would have just treated it as a simple error. You would have gotten away with it. You would have just tried to steal from me another way later down the road. I needed to eliminate you as a threat permanently. In the world of crisis management, we do not just block attacks. We let the enemy walk right into a trap and lock the door firmly behind them. I needed the crime to be absolutely complete. For a financial crime to be fully prosecutable, the stolen money actually has to move across state lines. I had to wait for the bank to physically disperse those funds into Naomi's business account. I had to let you think you won. I had to let you stand at the altar and brag about your brilliant scheme. The moment that wire transfer cleared this morning, my lawyers sent a massive encrypted file directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We provided federal investigators with your exact laptop serial number, your internet protocol history, and a complete log of your digital forgery. You did not just steal from a wealthy woman. You triggered an automated federal response from the highest financial authority in the country. The agents tearing apart your apartment right now are not local police officers. They are federal agents, and they already have all the evidence they need to put you away for a very long time. The line went dead quiet for a moment, except for the chaotic sounds of the raid. Jason was completely speechless. The crushing weight of his profound stupidity finally broke his spirit. He realized that the woman he thought was a naive, lovesick bride had methodically engineered his total destruction. He thought he was the mastermind plotting to steal a luxury house, but he was nothing more than a rat running blindly into a sophisticated trap. There was a loud crash on his end of the phone. I heard a stern voice order him to drop the device and put his hands behind his back. "Natalie, please," he whispered one final time. His voice was completely hollow and broken. I stood up from the sofa and walked over to the massive glass window. I looked out over my beautiful, quiet neighborhood. I felt absolutely nothing for the man crying on the phone. Federal wire fraud in this state carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. I said, my tone completely flat and final. Your sister is going to face the exact same charges for receiving stolen funds. I highly suggest you stop crying and start looking for a very good public defender. Enjoy your new life, Jason. Good night. I pressed the red button on the screen. The call disconnected immediately. I permanently blocked his number and went back to drinking my wine. I woke up the next morning feeling incredibly refreshed. The heavy burden of carrying Jason's fragile ego and dealing with his toxic family was finally gone. I took my time enjoying a quiet breakfast before driving to my corporate office downtown. When I stepped into my sleek glass corner office, my legal team was already waiting for me. They had been monitoring the federal situation all night. The news they delivered was even better than I had anticipated. The federal agents did not just arrest Jason for forging my signature. They had executed a massive search warrant on Naomi's apartment and seized every single piece of electronic equipment she owned. The federal investigators spent the entire night analyzing the financial records of Naomi's so-called cosmetic startup. During the bridal suite ambush, they had proudly demanded 15% of my company profits to fund her beauty brand. They acted like she was a brilliant entrepreneur waiting for her big break. But the federal auditors quickly uncovered the pathetic reality behind her glamorous social media facade. There was no makeup line, there were no manufacturing contracts, there were no warehouses full of beauty products. Naomi's business was nothing more than a highly illegal pyramid scheme designed to steal money from vulnerable women on the internet. For the past 2 years, Naomi had been recruiting her young social media followers into a fake investment program. She promised them massive returns if they bought into her exclusive beauty distribution network. She used the cash from new victims to pay off the early investors, creating the perfect illusion of a highly profitable business. She spent the rest of the stolen money on designer clothes, expensive vacations, and maintaining her fake wealthy lifestyle. But like all pyramid schemes, the money eventually ran out. Her fake empire was rapidly collapsing. The angry investors were starting to demand their money back and threatening to report her to the authorities. She was completely desperate for a massive cash injection to keep the scam alive. That was the real reason behind the ridiculous contract at the wedding. That was why Jason was so desperate to secure that $300,000 loan using my house as collateral. They needed my money to pay off the angry victims of her fraudulent business. They were trying to use my legitimate wealth to quietly bail her out of a massive criminal conspiracy. But their desperate plan backfired in the worst possible way. By wiring stolen bank funds directly into an active financial scam, they committed one of the most serious federal offenses possible. The lead investigator officially classified the $300,000 wire transfer as active money laundering. Naomi was no longer just an annoying sister-in-law who wanted free rent. She was the primary suspect in a federal racketeering and financial fraud investigation. Using fraudulent mortgage funds to conceal an illegal pyramid scheme meant her potential prison sentence was just doubled. The federal authorities froze every single bank account associated with her name. They seized her expensive car, her designer clothes, and all the luxury items she had purchased with stolen money. She was sitting in a federal holding cell, completely stripped of her fake wealth and her arrogant pride. My legal team handed me the official federal documents confirming that my name was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. The bank had already reversed the fraudulent lien on my property. My credit score was perfectly safe, and my $2.4 million mansion remained entirely mine. I had successfully navigated the worst crisis of my life without losing a single penny. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee and smiled at my lead attorney. The threat was neutralized and the criminals were locked away. But a crisis is never truly over until the media gets involved. Just as my legal team was packing up their briefcases, my office phone began to ring. It was not Jason or Brenda begging for mercy, it was my director of public relations. She informed me that several major news outlets in Chicago had just intercepted the federal police scanners from the night before. Local journalists were already digging into the public arrest records. The juicy story of a local corporate groom getting raided by federal agents on his wedding night was simply too good to ignore. Reporters were actively connecting the dots between Jason's arrest and Naomi's sudden disappearance from social media. The local news stations were preparing to broadcast the scandal of the fake beauty influencer to millions of viewers. I was just about to instruct my public relations director on how to handle the incoming media inquiries when my office phone rang again. It was the head of security for my building. He informed me that there was an older woman in the main lobby causing a massive disruption. He said she was screaming my name, crying hysterically, and refusing to leave the premises until she spoke to me directly. I did not even need to ask the security guard for her name. I knew exactly who it was. The reality of the federal raid had finally shattered her delusional world, and now she was desperate. I stood up from my desk and smoothed out the fabric of my tailored suit jacket. I walked out of my private office and looked down over the interior balcony that overlooked the main reception area of my public relations firm. Down in the beautifully designed corporate lobby, Brenda was completely falling apart. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, sophisticated mother of the groom who had demanded my house just yesterday. The heavy makeup she wore was running down her face in dark streaks. Her hair was a messy disaster, and her clothes looked like she had slept in them. She was sobbing uncontrollably and practically throwing herself against the marble security desk. Several of my employees and a few important corporate clients were standing nearby staring at her in absolute shock. When she looked up and saw me standing on the second-floor balcony, she completely lost whatever dignity she had left. She dropped heavily to her knees, right there on the polished marble floor. "Natalie, please, you have to save my children," she wailed. Her voice echoed loudly through the modern open space of the office building. She clasped her hands together in a desperate pleading gesture, holding them up toward me like I was a judge. You are the only one who can stop this terrible nightmare. The federal agents took my babies away in cold metal handcuffs. They seized all the bank accounts and they locked Jason in a federal holding facility. They treated my children like common criminals. You have to call the federal police and tell them it was all a big misunderstanding about the money. Please, Natalie, I am begging you from the bottom of my soul as a mother. Have some compassion in your heart and forgive them for their mistakes. They are your family, and family always forgives. I looked down at her feeling absolutely zero sympathy for her manufactured tears. She was attempting to use the exact same toxic psychological manipulation tactics she had used her entire life to enable her terrible children. She was actively weaponizing the concept of motherhood and family duty to guilt-trip me into submission. She wanted to create a massive public spectacle to force my hand. She genuinely thought that if she cried loud enough and made a big enough scene in front of my professional colleagues, I would be too embarrassed to refuse her demands. She assumed I would quickly pull her into a private, hidden room and agree to drop the federal charges just to make the public embarrassment stop. She wanted to play the role of the heartbroken mother, to make me look like the cruel villain in front of my own staff. She was severely mistaken about how I run my business and my life. The head of security looked up at me, waiting for my official command. He reached for his radio, ready to call the local police to have her physically dragged out of the building for criminal trespassing and disturbing the peace. But I raised my hand and shook my head to stop him. Having her arrested and dragged out screaming would only feed her pathetic victim narrative. I needed to crush her manipulative spirit completely, and I needed to do it in broad daylight where she could not twist the truth later. I leaned over the glass railing and spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm and loud enough for everyone in the entire lobby to hear clearly. Do not throw her out, I told the security guards. Escort her upstairs to the executive floor right now. Bring her directly into the main glass conference room. My employees immediately exchanged surprised and curious looks. The main conference room was situated right in the center of the office floor. It was constructed entirely of clear soundproof glass from the floor to the ceiling. Anyone sitting inside that room could be clearly seen by every single employee working at their desks, but no sound could escape. I turned around and walked purposefully toward the conference room. I was going to give Brenda the exact audience she desperately wanted, but she was going to quickly realize that she was no longer the director of this drama. She was the one stepping directly into a transparent interrogation room. I hear you loud and clear. No more excuses. Here is Section 18 exactly as you requested, written entirely in English, with no special punctuation marks, just periods, so your AI voice tool can read it perfectly. The security guard escorted Brenda into the transparent glass conference room located right in the middle of my office. Every single employee stopped typing on their keyboards and silently turned their eyes toward the brightly lit room. Brenda collapsed into the expensive leather chair, her face completely wrinkled from excessive crying. She continued to ramble on about a mother's love and how I was a cruel daughter-in-law who showed no mercy to family. I calmly pulled out the opposite chair and sat down facing her. I did not bring any legal documents with me. I simply placed my smartphone flat on the cold glass table. You want me to drop the charges and release your children, right? I asked in a perfectly calm tone. Brenda nodded vigorously, her eyes flashing with a tiny glimmer of hope. She actually thought that if she humbled herself and begged, I would feel sorry for her. But instead of answering her directly, I reached out and tapped the screen of my phone. A clear audio recording began to play from the small speaker. It was the entire conversation from the bridal dressing room yesterday morning. Brenda's own arrogant voice echoed loudly in the quiet room. The pregnant girl needs space. That house is way too big for just the two of you. The little bit of pocket money from your company is nothing anyway. The recording captured every single insult and degrading comment she made about my hard work and my assets. When Brenda heard her own cruel words, she was instantly speechless. The color drained completely from her face, turning her skin pale white. She stared at the smartphone with wide eyes as if it were a terrifying monster. All her desperate pleas about family love and forgiveness vanished completely when faced with the undeniable proof of her own greed and cruelty. "You hear that clearly, Brenda," I said softly, but every single word carried the heavy weight of a judge reading a sentence. "Just yesterday you used your authority as a mother-in-law to try and force me to hand over my property. You insulted me with the most toxic words possible. You honestly thought I would always be a submissive little bride who would let you and your children drain my bank accounts forever. But now that your pathetic extortion plan has failed completely, you drop to your knees and beg me using fake family affection. Do you really think I am that stupid?" Brenda trembled violently, gripping the edges of the glass table with both hands. "But they are your family," she whispered, her voice weak and completely stripped of its former authority. "You cannot be cruel enough to send your own fiancé and his sister to federal prison. You can just call the police right now and tell them you authorized that bank loan. If you just say one simple sentence, this entire nightmare will be over." I shook my head and let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You still do not understand how the real world works, Brenda," I explained very slowly so she could absorb the crushing reality of her situation. "I do not have the legal power to drop these charges. I am not the one prosecuting Jason and Naomi. The Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is the prosecuting entity. Wire fraud and money laundering are severe federal felonies in the United States. Even if I got down on my knees, begged the agents and lied, saying I approved the loan, they would never drop the case. Your son and your daughter committed a massive crime against the federal government of the United States, not just against me. A 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary is absolutely inevitable, and no one in the world can save them now." That brutal truth completely broke Brenda's spirit. She finally realized that all her crying, manipulation, and begging were entirely useless. The law was already in motion, and the trap had snapped shut around her children. But the pathetic pride of a desperate loser made it impossible for her to accept total defeat. She suddenly jumped up from her leather chair, slamming both of her hands flat against the glass table. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "If you refuse to save my children, then I will make sure you never live in peace," Brenda roared, her voice trembling with intense fury. "You think you can destroy my perfect family this easily? Jason is still a senior corporate sales director. He has an amazing career and a massive salary. He will use every single penny he earns to hire the most ruthless defense attorneys in this entire city. We will countersue you for defamation and character assassination. We will drag you into court and make you pay dearly for everything you have done to us today." I looked up at Brenda and let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound of my laughter seemed to confuse her even more. Her face was bright red, and she was panting heavily from screaming her empty threats. She actually believed that her son still had a corporate shield to hide behind. She genuinely thought his high-paying executive job was completely safe from the massive federal criminal investigation he had just triggered. "You really think a major corporation is going to keep a federal criminal on their payroll?" Brenda, I asked, leaning back in my chair. I rested my hands calmly on the glass table. "Jason is a senior corporate sales director. His entire career is built on maintaining the highest level of professional credibility and absolute financial trust with major corporate clients. Do you honestly believe his employer will let him handle multi-million-dollar corporate accounts while he is actively being investigated for wire fraud and identity theft?" Brenda stared at me in absolute silence. Her chest stopped heaving. A brand new layer of cold dread began to wash over her face. She was slowly realizing that her ultimate backup plan was already dead. "His regional director was sitting in the third row at the church yesterday," I reminded her. "He watched your daughter scream like a lunatic, and he watched you fake a heart attack on the red carpet. He watched me expose Jason's massive mortgage fraud in front of 300 important guests. But I did not just stop at a public announcement. I am a professional crisis manager. I always make sure the threat is completely neutralized from every possible angle." I picked up my smartphone and swiped the screen. I opened my sent email folder and turned the device around so Brenda could see the bright screen clearly. Last night, while the federal agents were busy raiding your daughter's apartment, I drafted a very detailed email, I explained slowly. I sent a high-priority message directly to the board of directors and the human resources department of Jason's company. I attached the audio recording of your extortion attempt in the bridal suite. I also attached the official federal charging documents and the bank fraud alerts. I provided his employer with undeniable proof that their senior sales director had forged financial documents and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. Brenda let out a small, weak gasp. She reached out with a trembling hand, as if she wanted to grab the phone and delete the email herself. But her arm dropped back down to her side. She was physically drained. A major financial corporation will never risk their own public reputation to protect an employee who commits felony fraud. I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet glass room. They consider him a massive liability. They cut ties instantly to protect their own corporate image. This morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the Human Resources Department sent a termination notice to his personal email. They remotely locked his company laptop and deactivated his corporate mobile phone. He is officially unemployed. He was fired for criminal cause, which means he will not receive a single penny of severance pay, I added, delivering the final crushing detail. He has absolutely no income. His personal bank accounts are completely frozen by the federal government. He cannot even pay his monthly rent. He certainly cannot afford to hire a high-profile defense attorney to fight the federal prosecutors. He will be assigned an overworked public defender, just like every other common criminal who cannot afford private legal representation. He is going to face a federal judge with absolutely no money and no corporate backing. The absolute finality of my words struck Brenda like a physical blow to the chest. Her knees finally gave out completely. She slumped heavily back into the leather chair. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her eyes were wide and completely vacant. She stared at the transparent glass wall of the conference room, but she was not looking at anything. The arrogant, confident woman who had stormed into my lobby demanding my complete surrender was entirely gone. She finally understood the absolute totality of their destruction. Her perfect golden boy was completely ruined. He had no job, no money, and no future. Her precious daughter was facing a decade in a federal prison for running a massive pyramid scheme and laundering stolen money. They had plotted to steal my wealth and my luxury home to fund their greedy lifestyle. But instead they had completely incinerated their own lives. They had absolutely nothing left. The silence in the glass room was deafening. My employees outside were still watching the scene unfold, but they could not hear the total devastation Brenda was experiencing. She was completely broken. I sat quietly and watched the terrifying reality settle into her eyes. The game was officially over. Brenda sat frozen in the expensive leather chair, staring blankly at the transparent glass wall. Her mind was entirely consumed by the terrifying reality of her ruined family. I allowed her to sit in that suffocating silence for a few more moments. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I pulled out a crisp manila folder and placed it gently on the smooth glass table directly in front of her. The soft thud of the folder hitting the table made her flinch slightly. She looked down at the document, but she was too mentally exhausted to even ask what it was. Yesterday morning, you ambushed me in a dressing room and demanded that I sign a completely ridiculous family duty contract, I said, my voice breaking the heavy silence in the room. You tried to force me to surrender my home and my income to your children. Today I have a contract of my own for you to sign. I reached over and flipped the folder open. Inside was a thick stack of legal papers printed on heavy, high-quality paper. I slid the document closer to her trembling hands. This is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a legally binding civil no-contact order prepared by my corporate legal team, I explained. I watched her eyes slowly scan the dense legal paragraphs. She could barely read the words through her tears. I decided to summarize the terms for her. If you sign this document, you are legally agreeing to never contact me, my employees, my clients, or anyone associated with my business ever again, I stated firmly. You and your children are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my residence or my corporate office. You are strictly forbidden from mentioning my name, my company, or the details of our previous relationship to any media outlets or on any social media platforms. If you violate any single term of this agreement, my lawyers will immediately file a massive civil lawsuit against you that will completely bankrupt whatever you have left. Brenda slowly looked up from the papers. Her eyes were red and swollen. Why would I ever sign anything for you? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You have already taken absolutely everything from us. You sent my children to federal prison and destroyed my son's career. I have absolutely nothing left for you to take. You still have your personal reputation in your quiet little suburban neighborhood. Brenda, I replied, leaning forward slightly. You still have your church friends and your social club. You care deeply about how other people perceive you. That is exactly why you wanted my luxury house so badly. You wanted to show off to your friends. I tapped my finger lightly against the glass table. Right now, the local news stations only know that federal agents raided a fraudulent cosmetic startup. I continued. They do not have the full story yet. They do not know about the forged marriage certificate or the stolen mortgage funds. Most importantly, they do not have your name or your home address. Brenda swallowed hard. A new wave of pure terror washed over her face. If you sign this contract right now, I will step away from this entire situation, I promised her. I will decline to comment to any journalists. I will let the federal prosecutors handle the narrative quietly in the courtroom. But if you refuse to pick up that pen, I will immediately release a comprehensive press kit to every major news network in Chicago. I will give them the audio recording of you trying to extort me. I will give them Jason's forged documents, and I will give them your exact residential address. I paused to let the threat fully sink into her mind. There will be news vans parked on your front lawn in exactly 1 hour, I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. Investigative reporters will be knocking on your neighbors' doors, asking how it feels to live next to a family of federal criminals. Your face will be broadcast on the evening news across the entire state. Every single person you know will see exactly what kind of greedy, manipulative criminal you truly are. Brenda began to shake violently. The thought of public humiliation was worse than death to a woman like her. The fake, elegant facade she had maintained for decades would be completely incinerated on live television. She looked at the papers, and then she looked at me. She realized she had absolutely no leverage and no power. She was entirely at my mercy. I pulled a sleek silver pen from my pocket and rolled it across the glass table. It stopped right in front of her trembling hands. Sign it, Brenda, I ordered. Sign it and walk out of my building right now, or I will make the call. She slowly reached out and picked up the silver pen. Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely hold it properly. She pressed the tip of the pen against the signature line on the final page of the contract. She signed her name with messy, uneven letters. She was completely defeated. Her spirit was entirely broken. I calmly reached across the table and pulled the signed folder back toward me. I closed it and placed it securely in front of me. We are officially done here, I said, standing up from my chair. The security guards will escort you out. Brenda pushed herself up from the leather chair. She looked 10 years older than when she first walked into my lobby. She did not say another word. She turned around and slowly pushed the heavy glass door open. She dragged her feet across the marble floor of the office. Every single one of my employees watched her in absolute silence as she walked toward the elevator. She kept her head down, staring at the floor, hiding her tears in utter humiliation. The elevator doors opened, she stepped inside, and the heavy metal doors closed, shutting her out of my life forever. 1 week passed since Brenda walked out of my office building in complete humiliation. The federal justice system moved with terrifying speed when dealing with massive wire fraud and corporate money laundering. A federal judge officially signed the orders to completely freeze every single asset associated with Jason and his sister Naomi. Their bank accounts were locked down tightly. The government seized his expensive sports car and completely emptied his luxury apartment, to cover the legal restitution for the bank. He had absolutely zero access to any money. He could not even afford to buy a cheap cup of coffee, let alone hire a high-profile private defense attorney. The fake wealthy lifestyle they had desperately tried to build using my money was completely dismantled block by block. Naomi faced a completely different level of absolute destruction. The news of her federal arrest and the collapse of her fake cosmetic startup spread across the internet like a massive wildfire. The hundreds of vulnerable young women she had tricked into funding her illegal pyramid scheme finally realized they had been completely scammed. They did not just stay quiet and accept their financial losses. They organized a massive aggressive online campaign against her. Her social media comment sections were instantly flooded with thousands of angry messages demanding their stolen money back. The platform administrators eventually stepped in and permanently deleted all of her accounts for violating their financial fraud policies. Her entire digital empire simply vanished overnight. The glamorous influencer who loved to brag about her fake designer clothes was now a disgraced criminal with absolutely no followers and no future. When Naomi was transported to the federal courthouse for her preliminary hearing, the reality of her crimes was waiting for her right on the front steps. A massive crowd of her former investors had gathered outside the massive stone building, holding angry handmade signs and shouting her name. They surrounded the police transport van, demanding justice and screaming for their stolen cash. She had to be physically escorted into the building by heavily armed federal marshals, while she desperately hid her crying face behind her shackled hands. There were no expensive lighting ring setups or perfect camera angles to save her now. She was forced to walk through a brutal gauntlet of pure hatred created entirely by her own relentless greed. I decided to take the morning off from work to personally attend their federal arraignment. I walked into the grand courthouse wearing a sharp-tailored business suit and took a comfortable seat in the back row of the public gallery. The heavy wooden doors opened, and Jason was slowly led into the room by a stern federal guard. He looked absolutely pathetic. He was no longer wearing the expensive custom-tailored suits he loved to flaunt at his corporate sales job. He was dressed in a standard, oversized orange prison jumpsuit. His wrists and ankles were securely bound with heavy metal chains that clinked loudly against the polished floor with every single step he took. He looked exhausted, pale, and completely terrified of the federal judge sitting high above him on the wooden bench. The overworked public defender standing next to Jason looked completely overwhelmed and totally unprepared for the massive stack of federal evidence filed against him. The judge began reading the official charges out loud for the public record: wire fraud, identity theft, real estate fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering. Every single word spoken by the judge carried the heavy, suffocating weight of a decade behind bars. Jason kept his head down, staring blankly at his chained hands. He was trembling visibly under the bright fluorescent lights of the courtroom. He finally understood that his life as a successful, respected businessman was permanently over. He was going to spend the best years of his life locked inside a tiny concrete cell surrounded by dangerous federal inmates. Just before the judge struck the wooden gavel to officially deny his bail request, Jason slowly turned his head to look back at the public seating area. His desperate, tired eyes scanned the wooden benches until they suddenly locked directly onto mine. I sat perfectly still with my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not smile or show any negative emotion at all. I just looked back at him with the cold, calculated stare of a woman who had successfully orchestrated his total downfall. In that brief, agonizing moment of direct eye contact, the absolute truth finally hit his broken mind. He saw the untouchable calm in my posture and realized the monumental scale of his own stupidity. He had tried to play a dangerous game of financial manipulation with a seasoned corporate crisis manager. He finally knew with absolute certainty that he had messed with the wrong person. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down, echoing loudly through the massive courtroom. The federal judge demanded absolute silence before proceeding with the preliminary hearing. The federal prosecutor stood up and began reading the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence they had collected over the past week. Every single detail of their massive financial crime was laid bare for the public record. The prosecutor detailed exactly how the digital signature was forged on the mortgage documents using a specific Internet Protocol address. He then explained how the stolen $300,000 was immediately wired directly into a fraudulent business account to artificially prop up an illegal pyramid scheme. The evidence was absolutely airtight and completely undeniable. The crushing weight of a 10-year federal prison sentence hung heavily over the defendant's table. The illusion of their unbreakable family bond was about to be completely tested under the blinding lights of the justice system. The judge asked the defense attorneys how their clients wished to plead. But before Jason's overworked public defender could even open his mouth, Jason suddenly jumped to his feet. His heavy metal chains rattled violently against the wooden table. He completely ignored legal protocol and began shouting directly at the judge. He was absolutely terrified of going to a federal penitentiary, and his natural cowardice instantly took over. He pointed a shaking finger directly at his own sister sitting just a few feet away from him. He loudly declared that the entire mortgage fraud was completely Naomi's idea. He told the judge that she manipulated him and constantly begged him for money to save her failing cosmetics startup. He claimed she provided him with the fraudulent bank account routing numbers and instructed him exactly how to bypass the security questions. He painted himself as a naive, loving brother who was tricked by a criminal mastermind. He threw his own sister directly under the bus without a single second of hesitation, hoping the judge would show him mercy for turning into a cooperating witness. Naomi violently leaped out of her chair the second the words left his mouth. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, absolute hatred. She screamed at the top of her lungs, calling her brother a pathetic liar and a manipulative sociopath. She yelled to the entire courtroom that Jason was the one who physically forged the digital signature because he was entirely broke and desperate to steal my $2.4 million mansion. She revealed to the judge that Jason's corporate salary was completely swallowed by his massive secret credit card debts and his obsession with maintaining a fake wealthy lifestyle. She insisted that she was just an innocent victim who blindly accepted a wire transfer from her successful older brother. She demanded that the federal prosecutors give him the maximum sentence and let her walk free. The federal judge slammed his wooden gavel repeatedly, demanding order in his courtroom, but the two siblings completely ignored him. They stood there in their matching orange prison jumpsuits, viciously tearing each other to pieces. They aggressively exposed every single ugly family secret and financial lie they had told over the years. They completely destroyed each other on the public record, desperately trying to shift the blame to avoid a decade behind bars. The perfect, loving family unit that Brenda had always bragged about was absolutely shattered in front of dozens of witnesses. When faced with the terrifying reality of losing their freedom, their fake loyalty evaporated instantly, leaving nothing but pure selfish survival instincts. I sat in the back row of the gallery watching the pathetic spectacle unfold. I did not feel angry or sad. I did not feel a single ounce of vindication or triumph anymore. I only felt a deep, profound sense of absolute emptiness regarding the man I almost married. Any tiny lingering speck of doubt or subconscious pity I might have held deep inside my heart was completely permanently erased. Watching them ruthlessly destroy each other confirmed everything I needed to know. I had not just dodged a bad marriage, I had escaped a family of vicious parasites who would gladly destroy their own blood relatives to save themselves. The federal marshals physically grabbed Jason and Naomi, forcing them aggressively back into their heavy wooden chairs. The judge angrily held them both in contempt of court and ordered them to be remanded back to federal custody without bail until their official trial date. The hearing was officially over. I stood up from the hard wooden bench and smoothed out the wrinkles in my tailored suit jacket. I did not look back at them one last time. I turned around and pushed the heavy courtroom doors open. I stepped out of the dark, suffocating building and into the bright, warm sunlight of the city. I took a deep, clean breath of fresh air, feeling an overwhelming wave of relief wash over my entire body. Every single tie to that toxic family was finally cleanly and permanently severed. The bright, warm sunlight of the city hit my face as I walked down the busy street, away from the federal courthouse. I did not take a taxi back to my massive $2.4 million mansion. Instead, I hailed a luxury black car and directed the driver to take me straight to my corporate office downtown. I was completely done wasting my valuable time on criminals and courtrooms. It was time to return to the real world where my true power resided. When I stepped out of the private elevator onto the executive floor of my public relations firm, the entire atmosphere felt completely different. The air was buzzing with intense corporate energy. My employees were moving quickly down the glass hallways carrying thick stacks of financial reports and legal briefings. I walked directly into my corner office and sat down in my plush leather chair. I felt an incredible surge of pure independent energy flowing through my veins. My personal trauma had not broken me. It had actually sharpened my professional instincts to a deadly point. That afternoon, my firm was scheduled to pitch our crisis management services to one of the largest technology corporations in the world. They were facing a massive multi-million-dollar public scandal involving a rogue executive who had tried to steal corporate secrets. Their board of directors was panicking, and they needed a ruthless firm to control the narrative and destroy the threat before their stock price collapsed entirely. I walked into the main glass conference room where the tech executives were waiting anxiously. I did not offer them warm smiles or empty reassurances. I sat at the head of the large wooden table and delivered the most aggressive and calculated presentation of my entire career. I explained to the terrified executives exactly how to isolate a toxic threat and amputate it before the infection could spread. I drew directly from my own recent experience of crushing Jason and his greedy family. I told the board of directors that when a rogue element tries to steal from you, you do not negotiate or wait for an apology. You gather undeniable digital evidence, you lock them out of the system completely, and you let them walk right into a trap that permanently destroys their credibility. I spoke with the absolute cold authority of a woman who had just successfully engineered the downfall of her own fiancé without losing a single penny. The technology executives sat in stunned silence, listening to my flawless strategy. They recognized the genuine ruthlessness in my voice, and they knew immediately that I was exactly what they needed to survive their crisis. Before the meeting even ended, the lead executive slid a massive stack of legal documents across the table. They signed a multi-million-dollar retainer agreement right there on the spot. It was the largest single contract my public relations firm had ever secured. My team burst into applause the moment the clients left the room. We had just cemented our position as the top crisis management agency in the entire city. I stood by the massive glass windows of my office, looking out over the beautiful Chicago skyline. My business was thriving, my bank accounts were overflowing, and my personal life was completely peaceful and drama-free. The toxic weight of a bad relationship was gone, allowing me to soar higher than I ever thought possible. I realized that surviving that wedding day ambush was the absolute best thing that could have ever happened to my professional career. A few days later, I was sitting quietly at my large mahogany desk, reviewing the final deployment strategy for our new tech client. My executive assistant knocked softly on the door and walked into the room carrying the morning stack of corporate mail. She placed the neat pile of sleek professional envelopes on the corner of my desk and quietly left the room. I reached over and began sorting through the daily correspondence. Most of it was standard corporate paperwork and invitations to exclusive networking events. But right at the very bottom of the elegant pile was a cheap, crumpled envelope made of thin gray paper. I picked up the strange envelope and examined it closely. It looked completely out of place sitting on my expensive polished desk. The return address was not a corporate office or a luxury apartment building. It was the official mailing address of the Metropolitan Federal Detention Center. Stamped across the top in faded red ink were the words "Inspected by Federal Prison Security." I slowly flipped the envelope over and saw the handwriting on the front. Even after everything that had happened, I instantly recognized the messy, uneven letters. It was a handwritten letter from Jason sent directly from his cold concrete holding cell. He was reaching out to me one last time from the absolute bottom of his ruined life. I held the cheap gray envelope in my hand, feeling the thin, rough texture of the paper against my skin. It felt entirely out of place in my luxurious corner office, surrounded by polished wood and expensive glass. I stared at the messy, uneven handwriting spelling out my name. I knew exactly what was inside that folded piece of paper, without even having to tear it open. I knew it was filled with pages and pages of pathetic apologies and desperate excuses. Jason was sitting in a cold concrete cell, entirely stripped of his corporate arrogance and his designer suits. He probably spent hours writing that letter, crying over his ruined life and begging for my forgiveness. He probably hoped that my heart would finally soften if he used the right tragic words to explain his massive federal crimes. But as I looked down at his desperate attempt to reach me, I realized something incredibly powerful. I did not feel a single drop of anger or hatred toward him anymore. The burning fury I felt at the church and the cold calculation I used to destroy his extortion plot had completely vanished. I was not holding on to any grudges, because holding a grudge requires emotional energy. And Jason was simply no longer worth a single second of my valuable time. He was no longer a person who mattered in my world. He was just a tiny, insignificant piece of trash that had temporarily blown into my perfect life. I did not open the envelope. I did not even run my finger under the glued seal to peek at the first line. Reading his pathetic lies would only poison my peaceful state of mind. Instead, I simply picked up my expensive leather briefcase and dropped the unopened letter inside. I finished my workday signing contracts and leading my public relations team with absolute flawless precision. When the sun began to set over the beautiful city skyline, I left the corporate building and rode in my private luxury car back to my massive $2.4 million mansion. The house was incredibly quiet and perfectly serene when I walked through the heavy front doors. There were no arrogant mother-in-laws demanding my space, and no greedy fiancés trying to steal my hard-earned wealth. There was only the beautiful, elegant sanctuary that I had built with my own two hands. I took off my suit jacket and walked directly into the spacious, modern living room. I pressed a small silver button on the wall, and the large gas fireplace instantly roared to life, casting a warm, beautiful orange glow across the polished marble floors. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out the cheap gray envelope from the Federal Detention Center. I walked slowly toward the burning fireplace, feeling the comforting heat radiating against my face. I stood there for a long moment, watching the bright yellow flames dance and flicker over the ceramic logs. I thought about the ridiculous family duty contract they tried to force me to sign. I thought about Naomi's fake cosmetic startup and Brenda's fake heart attack on the red carpet. They thought they could use my wealth to elevate their own pathetic lives. They thought I was just a naive stepping stone on their path to unearned luxury. But the universe has a very strict way of delivering absolute karma to those who try to build their castles on the backs of hardworking people. I slowly reached out and held the edge of the gray envelope directly over the bright open flames. I did not hesitate for a single second. The cheap paper instantly caught fire. The bright orange flames quickly consumed the federal prison stamp and Jason's messy handwriting. I held the corner of the envelope until the fire crept dangerously close to my fingertips, and then I gently dropped it down into the roaring fire. I stood there and watched the entire letter turn into a pile of blackened ash. The thick gray smoke disappeared up the chimney, carrying away the absolute last trace of Jason and his toxic family. It was the ultimate act of cleansing. I was not doing this out of petty revenge. I was simply taking out the trash and permanently removing a bad investment from my elite life. I watched the final glowing ember fade into gray dust. A deep, genuine smile spread across my face. I turned my back on the fireplace and walked toward my massive gourmet kitchen to pour myself a glass of expensive red wine. The nightmare was completely over. The criminals were locked away exactly where they belonged. I poured the dark red wine into a crystal glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The rich flavor was absolutely perfect. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over my perfectly manicured property. The security system was armed, the legal documents were finalized, and my corporate empire was expanding faster than ever before. I had survived a massive calculated ambush and emerged entirely victorious. I had successfully protected my heart, my home, and my millions from a coordinated family of predators. Anyone looking at my story from the outside would feel an overwhelming sense of absolute satisfaction. It was the perfect execution of flawless karma. The arrogant groom, who thought he was a mastermind, was now a completely ruined inmate facing a decade in a federal penitentiary. The greedy sister who wanted to steal my home to fund her illegal scams was locked in a holding cell completely disgraced and facing her angry victims. And the manipulative mother who orchestrated the entire plot was forced to return to her quiet, miserable life entirely isolated and publicly humiliated. They lost absolutely everything because they tried to take what was mine. I took another sip of my wine and let out a soft, relaxed sigh. I did not need a fairy tale wedding or a fake perfect family to be happy. I had my own strength, my own massive success, and my own unbreakable independence. I raised my crystal glass in a silent toast to the empty, beautiful room. I was taking full control of my destiny, and the future looked absolutely incredibly bright. I set my crystal glass down on the sleek kitchen counter for a moment. I walked across the polished marble floor toward the massive sliding glass doors that led to my private terrace. I pushed the heavy glass open and stepped out into the cool evening air. The city of Chicago was spread out below me like a glittering ocean of bright lights and endless possibilities. The wind blew softly against my face, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and city life. It was the sound of millions of people moving forward with their lives, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely in sync with that unstoppable forward momentum. I leaned against the cold metal railing of the balcony and looked down at the busy streets. I thought about how close I came to surrendering my entire life to a parasitic family. Society conditions successful women to be accommodating and forgiving. We are taught to compromise our own hard-earned boundaries for the sake of maintaining a relationship. We are told that family requires sacrifice, and that being a good wife means sharing everything you have built. I almost fell into that exact same trap. I almost let a mediocre man with a forged marriage certificate and a demanding mother steal the foundation of my independence. But my corporate survival instincts kicked in exactly when I needed them the most. In the business world, you do not negotiate with terrorists, and you do not sign bad contracts just to keep the peace. You audit the situation, you identify the threat, and you eliminate it with extreme prejudice. That is the exact same logic we must apply to our personal lives. Your personal boundaries are the most valuable assets you possess. When someone shows you they are willing to disrespect those boundaries to steal your resources, you do not give them second chances. You show them the door, and you lock it permanently behind them. People like Jason and Naomi rely entirely on the guilt and empathy of successful people. They use fake love and manufactured family duty as weapons to drain your bank accounts and your energy. They want you to feel bad for their failures so they can comfortably live off your success. But true self-worth means recognizing your own value and refusing to let anyone discount it. It means understanding that being alone in a peaceful mansion is infinitely better than being surrounded by greedy parasites in a crowded room. I worked 70-hour weeks to build my public relations empire. I sacrificed sleep and social events to accumulate my wealth. I was not going to let a pathetic man steal my kingdom just because he bought a cheap tuxedo. I built my life brick by brick through sheer willpower and endless determination. Nobody gets to move into my castle and demand the master bedroom just because they pretend to care about me. You have to earn your place at the table, and those three proved they only belonged in the garbage. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air. The stars were barely visible through the bright glow of the city lights, but the sky felt massive and completely open. I realized that my story was not just about escaping a disastrous wedding, it was a masterclass in absolute self-preservation. So many people ignore the glaring red flags because they are terrified of being alone or causing a public scene. They endure the disrespect and the financial abuse because they think it is normal. But nothing about financial abuse is normal. The moment Brenda handed me that ridiculous family duty contract in the bridal suite, she did me the greatest favor of my entire life. She forced me to wake up from the romantic delusion and look at the brutal reality of their intentions. She showed me that their version of love was nothing more than a calculated financial transaction. They saw my success as their personal lottery ticket, but I permanently canceled their winning numbers. I looked at the towering skyscrapers lighting up the downtown skyline. Somewhere in one of those buildings, my team was actively working on our new multi-million-dollar crisis management account. My professional life was thriving because I refused to compromise my standards. I protected my peace and my wealth with the exact same ruthless efficiency that I used to protect my corporate clients. I did not let fear dictate my actions. I let logic and cold, hard evidence guide my decisions. And because of that, I am standing on the balcony of my own luxury estate, while the people who tried to destroy me are sleeping on thin mattresses in federal holding cells. Justice is not always a natural force in the universe. Sometimes you have to take the evidence, wrap it in a perfect legal bow, and hand-deliver it to the authorities yourself. You have to be your own absolute protector. The cool wind picked up swirling around the balcony. I felt an incredible sense of absolute closure. The chapter of my life involving Jason, Brenda, and Naomi was permanently closed and sealed with a federal prison sentence. I picked up my crystal glass of red wine from the small patio table and held it up toward the glittering city skyline. I was celebrating my freedom, my intelligence, and my unwavering commitment to my own success. I smiled softly as I thought about the sheer arrogance of their failed plot. They actually thought I was just a naive little sheep waiting to be sheared on my wedding day. But they completely forgot one incredibly important detail. I am the one who runs the slaughterhouse. The most important lesson we can take away from Natalie's incredible story is that your personal boundaries and financial security should never be compromised for the sake of a romantic relationship or fake family obligations. Society often pressures successful individuals, especially women, to shrink themselves down to make their partners feel more secure. We are constantly told that true love requires blind trust and endless financial sacrifices. But Natalie proves that true self-worth means keeping your eyes wide open and protecting what you have built with your own two hands. When Jason and his greedy family tried to weaponize the concept of marriage to steal her luxury home and her hard-earned money, Natalie did not panic or cry. She did not let the fear of public embarrassment force her into signing a predatory contract. Instead, she shifted her mindset from a heartbroken bride to a ruthless corporate executive. She used logic, legal documentation, and cold, hard evidence to completely dismantle their extortion plot. The lesson here is that toxic people will always try to use your empathy against you. They will try to make you feel guilty for your own success so they can comfortably live off your wealth. You must learn to recognize these manipulation tactics immediately. Never ignore massive financial red flags just because you are wearing a wedding dress or holding a bouquet of flowers. You have to be the ultimate protector of your own peace and your own empire. Do not let parasites convince you that setting strict boundaries makes you a bad person. If you loved hearing how Natalie absolutely destroyed this toxic family and completely reclaimed her power, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs a strong reminder to always protect